Well, every conference needs flagship programs that draw viewership outside of just the conference's footprint. And without USC and UCLA, Washington needs to become one of those programs for the Pac-12. But can they?
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I am your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights-free and beloved Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, please and thank you wherever you listen to or watch the show. We've got my guy, Roman Tomashoff, on the show today. He covers Washington for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. We'll talk about recruiting later. We'll talk about the Big Ten and yada, 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 and all that sort of stuff. But Roman, I know that on the recruiting front, vibes are higher than they were certainly a few weeks ago for Seattle fans on the trail, and we expect that to continue in many ways, as we'll get to later. But first, I want to dive into this question. So the idea of kind of a flagship program, to me, when I think of that, I think Alabama, Georgia, LSU in the SEC. I think for a long time, Oklahoma, Texas in the Big 12. I think Ohio State, Michigan in the Big 10. Florida State, kind of Miami, Clemson in the ACC. I think every conference needs to have those. And going forward, it would be in the best interests, based on the television numbers of the Pac-12, if Washington is in the mix every year with Oregon and Utah. Form kind of that trio, I think, of schools where you look at them and say, okay, every time they play, that's must-see TV, and we'll probably decide who gets to the Pac-12 championship game. Do you feel that Washington is capable, with Kalen DeBoer, of being that sort of program?
You know, Spencer, I think that's a great question, because I absolutely do, because this is something that we've seen from the program before. Yeah, I know Oregon fans are going to be like, oh, they share a national championship, whatever. We're not going to go into that. But this is something that the program has done before, because under Don James in the late 80s, in the early 90s, this was one of the premier programs in the country. And sure, they've taken a lot of time off. They were starting to get there under Chris Peterson when we saw them go to 3 straight New Year's 6 games. And they really still weren't receiving the national recognition that it felt like they deserved. But without USC, without UCLA, yes, absolutely. I do think that Washington can, even with them in the conference, I feel like this program has the opportunity to be one of those premier programs in the conference. And Kalen DeBoer has done a great job of elevating it, because it's something that, you know, honestly, quite frankly, under Chris Peterson, he didn't really want. And it's something where he just was not a big social media guy, not a big hype guy, just kind of a we'll talk on the field, and that's really the extent of everything that's going to happen around this program. That was just kind of his mentality. That was his mantra. So kind of seeing Kalen DeBoer not only understand the Peterson way of how to succeed, you know, on the field, on the recruiting trail, doing all those sort of things. And obviously we'll get into recruiting stuff a little bit later, but it's something where Kalen DeBoer, with some of the hires that he's made off the field, when it comes to just adding to the social team, adding to things like that, we've seen such a major upgrade in those areas that it feels like the answer really is yes. Because Washington is investing more money in the football program. They understand what it takes to get to that next level. And Kalen DeBoer seems to be a driving force of all that. He seems to be one of the main players just saying, hey, I want to succeed. I want to win a national championship here. And if we're not doing X, Y, and Z, it's not going to happen. So that's something where I expect that to continue to just kind of rise. And if 2023 kind of goes the way that most media outlets kind of expect it to, I'm one of them where I do think that it could be a major year for this team. Then yeah, no, absolutely. This could be one of the premier programs in the Pac-12.
It feels sustainable at the moment. I do think, Roman, for anyone who would ask a question about whether or not they can, do it and not really have any kind of bumps in the road in a major way over a 10-year stretch. It's not that big brands in conferences don't have down seasons, right? Oklahoma just went 6-7. They were still playing in the Big 12 at that time. LSU had, I believe, a 6-7 or 6-6 season with Ed Orgeron. Yeah, that wasn't good enough, and they got him out of there. Even in the Pac-12, USC went 4-8. Oregon had a 4-8 season in 2016. It's not that
UW 4-8.
Right? Yeah, UW, and that's kind of what I wanted to get into here. Is like, Washington, with the capability they have as a program, they're one of just 2 Pac-12 schools, remember, to ever make the college football playoff. So when you ask anyone wondering out there, like, well, why do you pick Oregon? Why don't you pick Utah? Why don't you pick that? And by the way, I think Utah is definitely one of the teams in the mix, and we know that Utah is sustainable with their head coach as long as Kyle Whittingham is there. But I think year 2 is going to be kind of a test of that for Kalen DeBoer of, hey, you have to show this was not just a flash in the pan. You have to keep this thing rolling along, because we've seen when Washington doesn't have the right coach, and I mean, anybody with the wrong coach can, have a pullback, but Washington is not immune to that, right? Like, Jimmy Lake had a 4-8 season. It was all bad. Now they go out and they seemingly make the right hire there, but what are sort of the indicators for you going into year 2 that would make you feel, yeah, this is sustainable and they can be one of the top 3 football brands going forward in the league? Because by the television numbers over the last several years, the biggest TV draws remaining in the conference are Oregon, and then Washington and Utah have been very, very similar. I think the edge, in 2022, they were basically identical, but over the last several years, I think you'd put Washington ahead just a little bit because the media market's a bit more lucrative in Seattle than Salt Lake City. But what are kind of those indicators that you'll be looking for, Roman, as to, okay, yeah, this feels like it's going to be an average of 9.5 wins over the course of a 5-year stretch, which is really what the Pac-12 needs, because you need big-time teams and brands to establish themselves and play in big-time games.
Right. So, the first thing that I look for is something that I believe Kalen DeBoer has already achieved, and that is the culture that he has instilled at Washington. And it's just, you talk to anybody, whether it be, as you know, a big part of my job is covering recruits, getting on the trail, covering those kinds of dudes. And it's not just talking to them, it's talking to the players that are still on the team, looking at literally every single underclassman who could have declared coming back. And that includes Michael Penix. That includes, Michael Penix, not an underclassman, obviously, but still decided to come back. That's Roman Tomashoff, Jalen McMillan, Braylon Trice, Zion Chukwuola-Fatui, Troy Fautano, Roger Rosengarten. It's all those guys. And all of them saying, I need to come back because, yeah, the job isn't finished, but this is somebody that I want to play for. And this is somebody that I believe can help take us to the next level, because that's something that every single one of them has said since then, over the course of spring practice, over the course of interviews as to why they were coming back. Whatever it might be, this is a message that they have all been united on. And it's all because of that coaching staff. And it's something where if you listen to, going back even farther, it's going back to when a lot of them were kind of mulling the transfer portal, when Jimmy Lake got fired and this new staff came in. I've talked to members of the staff that were like, yeah, everyone was kind of a little bit unsure when we first got there.
Which is understandable.
Oh, absolutely. And then they kind of got through that first winter workout program, and all of a sudden it was boom, yeah, we're all bought in. This is where we want to be. This is where we're going. And we look at some of the hires. The hire that I like to point to most, that kind of just shows what Kalen DeBoer wants in his coaching staff, as well as wide receivers coach Jamarcus Shepard. Because there are a few people that I have enjoyed in somebody who covers not just sports, but a little bit of entertainment media as well. There are a few people that I like talking to more than Jamarcus Shepard. There are a few more just genuine and engaging people. Kalen DeBoer is actually one of them. But there are a few more engaging people in the media market just that you can talk to than Jamarcus Shepard, because he's just a good person, very upfront, who knows what he's talking about, and it just will grab your attention. And just me being somebody who, I played college baseball. I've never played a down tackle football in my life. I would if this dude wanted me to go out and play for him, I would do that, because he's just that kind of person. And that's something that I believe Kalen DeBoer relies very heavily on. And I feel like I'm just making a very roundabout point here. But the point is, he knows what it takes to succeed, especially in a coaching staff. And that's something that he has done a great job of bringing in. And if he can continue to identify those kinds of people when somebody like Ryan Grubb, his offensive coordinator, leaves to take a Power 5 job, maybe some other coaches will follow him and take other jobs elsewhere. If he can continue to bring in people like that, then this is going to be a very consistent program.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to touch on. You need to be able to acquire talent, not just with your players, but also with your coaching staff, the former of which we have to discuss because Washington's picked up some momentum there, and I think that's telling as to, how sustainable all this can be. Your gambling winnings, however, can be as sustainable as you make them if you go check out FanDuel, because you can bet everything you want over there. You can take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right, just $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's all in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. You can bet all the Pac-12 over-unders, championship odds, win totals. Everything that you want is on FanDuel, and there's no better place to bet Major League Baseball on FanDuel as well, America's #1 sportsbook. Sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, nice quick little second segment sip to keep us going here. So I suppose you're new to that. That's something that we got rolling around here.
That's the first time I've seen that. So.
I gotta give the people who I so appreciate subscribing, listening to, or watching the show the best possible audio quality. You know how I do that? I don't have a sore throat. I don't have a dry mouth. We can't have that sort of stuff. We can't have it. It's unacceptable. Will not be tolerated at any point in time. Anyway, so. Now that I'm done being weird, I want to get back to Washington here, because I think Kalen DeBoer at this point in time, based on what you've said, has got the culture component down for winning football at the Power 5 level in the Pac-12. X's and O's. I think we saw it last year with the jump that they made with a lot of the same players from a team that went 4-8 the previous year. I think we saw his X's and O prowess at Fresno State when he almost beat Oregon at Autzen Stadium and did beat UCLA down there in the Rose Bowl. I think he's got those two items down. But one other element that I think is not necessarily a lingering question or a doubt or anything, but I think is probably just the biggest question for Kalen DeBoer is, okay, what's the recruiting potential here, right? Both on the coaching staff and on the players. So let's start with the players, and then we can get to the staff, because I think that's an interesting point. Washington recruiting about a month ago, Roman, it was in a different stratosphere in a bad way compared to what it is right now. But for anyone who wants to, dog on Washington here, pun 100% intended, by the way, for them taking a longer time to get their momentum going. This is exactly the same script that Washington followed on the recruiting trail last season. They were really slow in June. Nothing really happened. They were down next to, Mountain West and G5 schools in the recruiting rankings, but now things are starting to tick up and up. So talk about the players that they've been landing and the players that they are also expected to land here, maybe as people are listening to or watching the show.
Yeah. So let's start with last year. So last year, the biggest win that they had at just kind of early on, which is kind of a big signal because people forget that last year's class ended up finishing 27th overall. For a mainly G5 coaching staff, making that jump to the Power 5, it was excellent. They just hit a home run with that class. Yeah, there were a couple of things that, they could have gotten a better player here, better player there, whatever. This coaching staff, when you look at some of the early offers that they hand out, and I was making this point the other day, quarterback that they just got to commit the other day, DeMarcus Davis from Etiwanda High School down in California. Somebody who was unranked when they offered him is going to see a very big rise. They did a very similar thing last year with quarterback Aiden Chillis, who ended up signing with Oregon State.
Aiden Childs.
Yes. I also forget I said Chili's a couple times. I apologize, Aiden. I truly do. But he ended up finishing as a top 60 player in the 247 for the class 2020.
And he looks really good, by the way. I don't know if you saw Oregon State spring game, but that's a dude. That's a dude right there.
Right, yeah. And one of the first offers he got was Washington. And they have done this time and time again. My favorite player that I've seen just kind of on film so far in this class is a 3-star from San Diego named Rachumana Bulabulavu.
How many times did you practice that name before coming on the show? That was seamless.
0, because I already knew it, because I can type it without looking now.
That was good. Anyway, continue.
So it's one of those things where, when it's somebody covering recruiting, you kind of have to play to the people a little bit, where you look at, like, oh, they offered this 5-star kid. They offered this 4-star player. Like somebody who is making a decision very soon, who went to the high school that I also played baseball for. Peyton Waters, a 4-star athlete. I think he'll play safety. Is making a decision today. Sounds like it might be Washington, but we'll see. It's Friday, so you guys will know the outcome of that by the time this is listened to. You watch guys like that first, and then it's like, oh, they offered this this unrated by the composite 3-star kid from San Diego, Rachumana Bulabulavu. You turn on his film, and you're like, wait, what did I just watch? There are a few players I've ever watched on film that are more explosive than that kid. Rugby background, plays in a really small high school, which kind of, all contributes to the unranked. He had, his other official visits that he took were to Oregon State and Arizona, I believe. And if Oregon State offers you to play defense, with the way that program has looked over the last couple of years, you trust that. You say, yeah, they're kind of in the Utah category for me now. Of if that school offers you to play defense, yeah, you can play defense.
Which, by the way, just as a quick side note, is an amazing transformation under Jonathan Smith and their defensive coordinator, Trent Bray. Because 2 years ago, Oregon State couldn't stop a nosebleed, and then a season ago they had one of maybe the best defense in the Pac-12 up there with Utah. And I agree with you fully that they are built in the same mold as a program as Utah, and they are now kind of a defensively led team, and offense is a complementary, though capable piece. And that is a sign of just tremendous growth there for the Beavs over the last several seasons. Shifting an identity like that is really good. Jake Dickert at Washington State, by the way, has done the same sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
That was an air raid under Mike Leach to Rolovich, the run and shoot, to now they're a defensively led team, and that's a credit to the head coach.
Oh, absolutely, and big respect to both those staff. They're doing awesome things, and you kind of turn on the film of that guy. You turn on the film of Justice Williams at Oaks Christian, also just criminal that dude was unranked. 6'4", 205 receiver from Oaks Christian. And just, you turn on the film, you're like, whoa, this dude looks like Roma Dunze. Getting those players and then combining them with Paki Finau, who I think is an awesome interior offensive lineman from California as well, who's rated somewhere in the 220s overall in the country, I believe. And then somebody else who will be deciding by the end of the week, Dominic Kirks, a 4-star from Ohio. Getting in on those guys, it kind of shows that what kind of talent evaluation this staff has, because then you look at the class of 2023. You look at the late flip of Caleb Presley from Oregon to Washington, top player in the state up here. Really, really talented kid. Combining that with Curly Reed, a 4-star from Louisiana. How often do you see Washington pull a 4-star from Louisiana?
Not often.
Never.
Not often. There were only, Washington hasn't even done it very often, but Oregon is frankly one of the. I think Stanford has this more than people might realize. But in terms of having a national reach and ability to go into other states all over the country and pull a blue chip prospect out, that is no small thing. You do not see a lot of Pac-12 programs doing that. Or Oregon can. Stanford is capable of doing that. They're showing that in 2024 as well. But I completely agree with you. I think we've talked about Curly Reed on this show before. Not just the player that he can be, but what it says about, DeBoer and the staff and where they're at in the recruiting. And I agree with the first point you made talking about recruiting as well. When they first got on the scene, they were coming from, the G5 level, pulled in a top 30 class, which is a testament to Washington's brand, but also the fact that, the staff does care about recruiting, because it's not like Washington is, just roll out of bed and get a top 10 recruiting class. Like you have some advantages there. Washington high school football scene is growing, I think, and generating a lot more blue chip recruits year in and year out, but you still have to work for it more because you're tucked away up there in the Pacific Northwest.
No, absolutely. And then just kind of playing off of that point as well, because Washington really doesn't have that national reach. And when you see these occasional players, like, okay, they did a really good job doing that. The best example last year, obviously he kind of fell a lot over the course of his senior year in the recruiting process, is Anthony James. He was a 4-star defensive end from Texas. I can't remember where. My apologies to him and his family. They're great people. But when he committed, he was ranked 52nd overall in the country. By 247 Sports. And that was such a huge get at the time.
Wiley, Texas, by the way.
Wiley, yes, that's
right.
Yeah,
Wiley.
There are so many cities in Texas. As somebody from California, you end up getting lost in the mix of all of them. But getting that was a really big win. And now we see them in the mix for some other high caliber prospects. The main one who hasn't decided, and it sounds like won't decide for a while, but the Huskies are heavily in the mix for, is I think he's the best defensive lineman in the country, Jericho Johnson down at Armijo High School in Northern California, because that dude can play. And yeah, he's going to end up taking visits to Bama and Georgia and USC most likely in the fall, but they're heavily in the mix for him. And if they're able to pull him, it's just kind of this leveling up that the staff needs to continue to do. And Spencer, you texted me about it, 2 weeks ago, just asking me, hey, what's going on with recruiting? Like, why is this class ranked in the 90s? And
that was just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it was. And what did I tell you? Be patient, because one of the first things that Kalen DeBoer likes to stress when it comes to recruiting is he wants to have the majority of his class wrapped up by the end of July, because it's just everything with focusing on the season, maybe some late flips or whatever, this, that, and the third thing. But one of the things that he likes to do is get everybody on campus around the same time and just have the ball start rolling from there. And he said it just the other day on a local radio show. He said that, yeah, the staff can recruit, as much as possible, but getting, official visits with players on campus, they are our best recruiters, because nobody can sell you on the program like a player can.
Yep.
And I think that's honestly a great way to go about it, because this is something that, like I said, he told us back in April, where he said, yeah, this is our plan. We're going to end up seeing something very similar to this every year. So going forward, if you end up seeing, maybe a couple guys commit early, and then just the majority of the class bang, 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 late June, early July, very similar to what just happened, that does seem like it's going to be a yearly occurrence. But if there's one thing that, even in just year two, I've learned from watching film, from just seeing what kind of talent these guys can bring in, and I've got one more example in Armon and Javon Parker, twin defensive tackles from Fordham, Michigan. Dudes didn't have any other offers, basically. It was kind of like Illinois and Michigan State as PWOs.
Those are not real programs.
No.
Those are in some other conference that are not the Pac-12. They don't count.
Not the Pac-12. Yeah. Definitely, not next on the docket that we'll get to. But those dudes came in. Javon burned his red shirt. Armon was dealing with an ACL injury, so he didn't play at all, and looks like he could end up even being better than his brother. But just kind of looking at those dudes on film, it's like, oh wait, these guys are incredible. How did these guys kind of go unnoticed like this? And the staff can continue to do that. And if they continue doing that while also proving that they're in the mix for some high caliber recruits like the Jericho Johnsons of the world, Isendre Afua, one of the local guys here, Jason Brown, if they can continue to pull in these Parkers and these Bulabalavus and Justice Williams of the world while also starting to compete at that higher level, this program is the sky's the limit. It really is.
And the recruiting we know is important. Like you will never find me, everybody, in the stars don't matter crowd. You won't find me there. It is not a philosophy that I subscribe to. And Washington is starting to rack up the stars to increase their class ranking. They were down. They were in the 90s, right? At one. Yeah, they were 92nd in the country. They've risen all the way up to 49th with just a couple of blue chip commits. If they do end up landing a couple more as you listen to or watch this show, that should see them continue to rise. But I think, where they can go as a program and whether or not they can be a consistent powerhouse in the league is not entirely dependent on bringing in high-level recruits. But you have to remember, it's not as if the roster or the cupboards were completely bare when Kalen DeBoer and company showed up, right? Like, Michael Penix is someone they brought in. Okay, yeah, but a lot of the receivers, a lot of the defensive players, a lot of those guys were on that Washington team that went 4-8 in 2021. Not all of them. Like, there were new components there, but it's not as if talent acquisition was the biggest problem facing Washington. And I think that once you have, this class of Washington players who have had so much success to this point, move on, I think that's going to be a legitimate test and question. Not to say they aren't capable based on the recruiting results we've seen. They can pull in top 30, top 20 classes at Washington. And if you string together, 2 Pac-12 titles in 3 years, I wonder if that doesn't bump up to, hey, can we get a top 10 class? Can we get a top, I don't know about top 5. That takes a long time. But like, could you go top 15? Could you go top 10? I think so. And just because I mentioned it earlier, I wanted to bring up that another thing DeBoer is going to be tested on, I think we all readily admit, and Ryan Grubb admits, is you have to be able to acquire coaching talent, right? The best programs have their coordinators get poached. And if Washington becomes what the Pac-12 frankly needs them to be, which is one of your linchpin teams on the football field, who when they play Oregon or when they play Utah, everyone is saying, okay, we got to watch that game. Like that's must-see television. That's, maybe college game day. That's nationally televised primetime slot. You have to be able to bring in quality coaches as well. And eventually, I don't think it's happened yet, but eventually, if Washington keeps winning, Kalen DeBoer will be tested on that sort of talent acquisition too.
No, absolutely. And I really love that you brought up, some of the guys that were already on the roster from the 2021 season, because a lot of those guys were in Chris Peterson's final 2 recruiting classes, which were far and away his best ones yet. He finished, I believe, like 16th and 17th, respectively, in the classes of 2019 and 2020, and did a fantastic job with both of those classes. People argue that's kind of part of the reason that he ended up retiring, was because it's just such a grind to recruit at that level at a consistent basis. And he did a really phenomenal job bringing in those classes, and you see the fruits of that labor now. So if that is, you're right, if that's something that can continue, it's, like I said, the sky really is the limit for this program.
Yeah, in 2019, the class finished 15th overall in the country under Peterson, and then the 2020 class, just pulling that up real quick, was 16th from the high school rank. So I think that kind of is, at least from what we've seen, the ceiling until we, reestablish or reset the boundaries on what Washington can be recruiting wise. But if you recruit at that sort of level, yeah, that gives you a good chance to at least be in the playoff picture at some point in time, if only about 50 other things go right over the course of a college football season, because that's kind of what it takes. And by the way, before we jump to our last topic here, Washington currently sits 4th in the Pac-12 in the 2024 recruiting rankings. Oregon's 1st, Arizona's 3rd, and coming in at 2nd is Stanford. Just as I tell you what, man, I'm not predicting anything. I'm just saying, nobody expected Stanford to be where they are at right now. They are bringing in. They've got 6 4-stars and 18 3-stars. They have more commits than anybody else, more total commits than anybody else in the class. I would love for
class pretty early, man.
It could be, yeah, but I would love for Stanford to be back. Like, if you had a top 4 of Oregon, Washington, Stanford, and Utah, and then you had other schools like Oregon State right there, who's capable of playing with those teams as we've seen, or maybe Dillingham builds Arizona State into something like that, or Jed Fish at Arizona. Like that just feels like a viable competitive league to me. Yeah, go ahead.
My question for you though is, if Stanford does take that jump, do they still get over 10,000 people in the stands? Or
Well, okay, fair question. However, if you go back and watch, I remember I went to the Oregon-Stanford game in 2011, and as an Oregon fan, that was, of course, awesome. But it was a packed house. It was sold out. They are very winning dependent.
They're passionate
for showing up when they're not winning. It's not like Boulder, right? Okay, fans still show up in Boulder even though they've been terrible. Bay Area schools, not so much. You got to win more football games there. But while we have
which is quote in
yeah, that was not a great look. Not a great look for Cal there. But he wasn't wrong, by the way. Did not say anything wrong, and that is a vibe that I completely and utterly understand. Real quick, this question came in, Roman. This was from Rob. All you can be a part of the mailbag too. YouTube comments or on Twitter at smalls_55 or at LO_Pac-12. DMs and mentions wide open. Rob says, Spencer, how confident are you that Oregon and Washington won't leave the Pac if invited to the Big Ten? To me, they're the key to the Pac's long-term sustainability. That's what we talked about at the beginning of the show. Like you need a game that everybody wants to watch, that's got big implications, that's got big brands. I think Oregon and Washington present that. You want a big rivalry. I think Oregon and Washington definitely present that element as well. But you also need, like we were talking about, those kind of linchpin programs. And if it's not Oregon and Washington, who exactly could it be if they were to go to the Big Ten one day? That's a different question. But to me, Roman, and John Canzano on the podcast the other day talked about how he doesn't think that Oregon and Washington have quite the desire to be in the Big Ten, but it's just, yeah, I do too. I feel like if Oregon, now access to the playoff is the one thing that could really keep them there. That's where you'd have to drive home if you're George K. is, hey, your best path to getting into the playoff is right here in the Pac, which is true. But you know what they say, money talks and bleep walks.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. That was exactly the point I was going to make, is it's going to depend on this media deal. And it's kind of been leaking out, not sure how true it is or not, but that
nobody has any idea.
No, who knows? So,
Who knows?
That's why I feel comfortable saying all of it, because there's a chance it's true. Like, I could probably throw something out there on a burner account and get like 500 retweets being like, oh.
You could get more than that if you say the right thing.
No, absolutely.
You can get a lot more.
The fact that it's kind of leaking out there that, Oregon and Washington are asking for a bigger piece of the pie media rights wise and money wise, which I believe that, because they kind of deserve it at this point. Like without.
But do they have the leverage to ask for that though? You have to have it. If you're going to make that demand, I'm not saying they don't have the right to, sure, right, based on the television contract, but do they have a threat that they could reasonably lobby to the Pac-12 and say, if you don't give us this, we're going to do X? Because I just don't see that avenue.
I think they kind of do, personally. But
what is that threat, do you think?
I think it's the eventual, just kind of, the Big Ten is eventually just kind of going to be like, yeah, we'll take you, because this is just kind of the way that it's moving. I think that's going to happen, just from some people that I've talked to, and obviously, like we just said, it's not like anybody has a better read on the situation than anybody else, but it does kind of feel like they would jump at the opportunity to join the Big Ten because the money will be there.
Yeah,
I feel like even taking a reduced cut in the Big Ten for a couple of years might end up being better than whatever the best Pac-12 media.
Oh, I mean, taking a permanent reduced cut in the Big Ten could be worth more than the Pac-12 media deal, which is right, because I don't think anyone is expecting the media rights deal to pay out, anywhere in the ballpark of like $40 to $45 million a school. But the Big Ten, if a full share is 75, a half share is, what is that, 37 and a half, rounded up, call it 40. Like, would they take that and assured relevance in a conference that, can make power moves rather than defensive ones like the Pac-12? It feels to me like that answer is yes, they would.
No, absolutely, and that's kind of where my whole line of thinking comes along. Is there is so much more that I feel like is given opportunity-wise, and yeah, it might end up being a tougher road to the playoff, but at the same time, we're getting a 12-team playoff. There are going to be more opportunities anyways.
True, but the Big Ten's a tougher conference. You can rack up the losses, and you just introduce another, another series of kind of unknown or beyond your control elements there. Whereas win the Pac-12, you will get in, right? That will be a de facto auto bid.
Absolutely, but at the same time, though, if you don't win the Pac-12, like let's say they decide to stay, and Washington drops that game to Oregon and drops one other one, whether it be Utah, Oregon State, whatever it is, and they miss the Pac-12 championship. Then it's they're basically done.
That is where it gets tough. Is the at-large bids
right
competing against the other conferences for that? That'd be the calculation. Easier path to a conference championship or tougher path to or easier path to an at-large bid. Like which one do you feel better about? That's the question.
This is something I think about from the year they did make the playoff in 2016. The fact that it was kind of like on edge, like, oh, will they beat out Penn State, who I believe they didn't make the Big Ten championship game that year.
No, I don't think they did either.
But there was, I remember there being a legitimate doubt. People were legitimately saying, hey, maybe Penn State deserves this bid over Washington, when UW just dominated the conference that year. The only loss was to USC. That was it. And that was...
Oh, never mind. I stand corrected. Penn State won the Big Ten in 2016.
Did they? Because there was somebody who
they beat Wisconsin.
Oh, it was Ohio State that got in and didn't win. Correct? Because there was something.
No, but that was this past year. Gosh, there have been too many years of the playoff. We're getting it all crisscrossed and such. But yeah, I mean, those debates will continue when you have a 12-team playoff. They're not gonna come to an end. It'll just be who gets the 12 and the 11 spots and whatnot. But Roman Tomashoff is on Twitter at rtomashoff34 if you want to check out his work. He covers Washington for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. Good to have you on the show as always, my man.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. That's going to be tomorrow, by the way. Saturday episode coming. See you then. Until then, have a wonderful rest of your day.